Well, hello, everybody. And finally, after a couple of 2-3 weeks, we're going to get video again of our Snap No Tap podcast because our world's greatest leader here, Joe Cardinal, was out of town. And along the way, he picked up a hitchhiker here for our podcast that we're going to introduce shortly. But Joe's battling, unfortunately, a little case of the COVID-19. And I miss you, Joe, but stay at your distance for a while. And, welcome back to Chicago. What's up?
Oh man, it's good to be back in civilization. I'll tell you what, man, I did. So, I've been, this whole summer has been very busy. I just came back from tracker school, and we've talked about tracker school, on several episodes here. Most recently, I finished their scout class. So I came back from that, and at the end of scout class, we got word, so this was like Thursday or Friday, that someone in the camp had tested positive. And sure enough, come Saturday, the last day where everybody's setting up, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And so my drive home, a couple days drive home, it's I'm here in the Chicagoland area, and they're in New Jersey. So it's like 14 hours, and I usually split that up. I stop at Pittsburgh often. That's kind of a good halfway, like, 1/4 of the way. Ooh, that was a long ride home. But that first warm shower I had, oh man, it was one of the best feelings I think I've ever had in my life.
Well, that's you don't shower that often anyway, so it's like a treat.
Right. Usually it's like, at the changes of the seasons, I like
Yeah.
to have my bath in springtime and whatnot. But yeah, I'm telling you, boy, you talk about the simple pleasures, man. When you haven't had warm water for 7 days and you were sleeping out. And so this one, they really upped the ante a little bit. I can't go into too much specifics, but it's probably one of the hardest physical things I've ever done. Now, not that I've had a very tough life per se, but and actually it made me think a little bit about your circumstances with your mom a little bit. I'm not being facetious either, but I can talk vaguely about what's going on in the class. I don't want to give specifics, because if people go, some of the learning experience is based on the surprise of things, which is true in each one of the classes, but very much so with scout class. But basically, and the other thing I'll say is that I often encourage everybody, I feel, and Dave maybe can back me up. So I met Dave, he's also a tracker student, is that I feel that first week, the very first week of what they call the standard class, I think everybody can and should do. It's very simple camping. It's a lot of lecture time, a lot of practicing the skills. It's not very hard. So even for like a city boy like myself, it was very doable. It was a little bit of a stretch because I hadn't camped for a whole week since maybe I was a little kid. Maybe never, actually, when I think about it, it usually was just weekends, but it's very doable and manageable. That is not the case with Scout Week. That is very demanding, and you have to want it. And I'll say I averaged between 2 and 4 hours of sleep a night. And that's what reminded me of you and your situation with your mom, and kind of feeling what that was like. So for technically 6 days, you're getting that kind of sleep, and you're being woken up by surprises. So you never really get good sleep. And that reminded me a lot of your circumstance. And I had some greater appreciation for what you were going through with your mom, not getting any sleep and constantly kind of, I guess, being on edge of when you're going to be woken up, and not getting solid sleep. And I only had it for a week. This went on for years for you. But yeah, and then at night you're sent on basically scouting missions. You're hiking for miles and miles to do whatever your objective is. So, several miles, well, at least a few miles every night. You're up to the wee hours of the morning, and then you're up at the crack of dawn, and then you're doing, after breakfast, you're doing martial arts training until lunch. So even though I lost several pounds in that week. I mean, it was legit, you know. Now, at least as far as those classes go. So this would be the one class where I'm like, I would want to talk to the person to make sure they want it, you know, before they get into it. It's definitely demanding, and I mean, it's doable. There were people who were older than me, who were in less shape than I was, who made it through. But it is, you got to want it. And, you know, I'm definitely proud I made it through. But anyways, then I think my defenses were probably pretty low. The fact that then, you know, it didn't matter, you know, I was vaccinated, whatnot, didn't matter. After 6 days of not a lot of sleep and a lot of exercise, bam, you know, I got hit with it. So I'm just now kind of what I would say back to normal, back to my normal. But that's what it was. And so that's why we haven't had really, because you know, it crosses a couple weekends. So we haven't been able to do a podcast. And then
Well,
a couple weeks prior.
You're back on it now.
Yeah. So, but anyway, so that was my most recent adventures. Tony, you had another seminar today, correct?
We did have another seminar at North Central College in Naperville, Illinois, Murner Fieldhouse, with a great bunch of people, basically the same people from last month with an addition. And, you know, we're rolling along. So it's the third Sunday of the month, like next August 20th, okay, will be the next seminar on Sunday, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. It's a good early start, get everybody fresh. We're looking to expand. I just got to get more bodies out there. This is a gigantic wrestling room, okay? So room, space is absolutely not a problem. We could probably hold a seminar with 75 people, maybe more, easily. It's gigantic. And it's a great bunch of people, pretty much with the exception of maybe two guys. It's right now Krav Maga students, okay? Chuck Maid, who's been on here, retired police officer friend, and he has all this information on the website, so on his Facebook or whatever, so Joe will keep posting it on here for signups and you know, link it to Joe or link it to Chuck's site. But these are just a great bunch of people. There's even a lady involved in it, all ages and all sizes and all all body pains. Everybody's got their own little, my joint hurts or this, or, you know, from just years of doing martial arts. And while they're not necessarily grapplers, right? They're strikers, more, they're Krav guys. This is why they're bringing me in, because of what I do is more Kravish, I guess, if you want to use that term. It's rough and tumble wrestling. So, and it's interesting because now when you have these bodies of people, it happened today where somebody will do something or ask a certain question. So when you have a curriculum, you just basically have an outline of what you want to show. And I never got through all the stuff I wanted to show because it was an awesome day today when people start bringing up scenarios. Okay. And I mentioned to one person, yeah, you see, this is one of the drawbacks of, you know, DVDs or instructional videos, is you don't get that interaction where somebody may have an idea or a thought or a question, or they may move in a certain way, or right or wrong. And then you can jump on that and say, look, don't do this. Or if the person does that, this is where you can go with it. You got to be careful with that, because you can keep stringing this along to where you'll never get back to full circle, because everything is a chain. But I love that stuff. That's why I tell people, actually, Javier used to say this, it don't matter what Tony's teaching. It's always something fresh, because, you know, I improvise, or I work off the energy in the room. So last month was pretty much all stand up. This month was all ground. Next month will be maybe a mixture of stuff. Ultimately, though, I'm going to teach my whole system. It'll take years, you know, you're not going to learn it in a weekend. But so anybody who's out there, you can jump in at any point in time, sign up for these seminars with Chuck. It's a beautiful facility. Google Maps took me a different way today, not the tollway. Don't ask me why, it just didn't. And once I got past Algonquin, for those who know the area, man, it's just turned out to be real nice, going through parts of Bartlett and Warrenville and Naperville and the beautiful scenery, but the campus itself is really pretty. Free parking across the street there. It's a little tricky to find the wrestling room. It's upstairs. Downstairs is the basketball and stuff, and then they have it's nice. Just I really recommend people to come out. I'd actually like to drive, if it wasn't so doggone far, I'd like to drive out there one day just to walk the campus, because it's, I'm an inner city urban guy, so seeing stuff like this, I'm not used to. I'm used to Cleveland State University and Cuyahoga Community College, which they don't have campuses like this. I've been to John Carroll in Cleveland, but I don't remember it, or not John Carroll. I never was there. Case Western Reserve. You've been there with me, Joe. That's University Circle, Little Italy area. When we went to Cleveland last year, but that's nothing like Naperville. It's a whole different. Naperville's cool, man. This college is really cool, and I hope to see a bunch of people. The more of the people, the better. So anyway, I'm sure we'll think of something else later in the show, but let's not keep our guests waiting, because Joe, this guy is one of the, I don't want to give it away just yet, but I think this is going to be a very, very interesting podcast, because this gentleman I got questions, because what he does for a living is something that, well, I would have never have done, because it wasn't practical where I lived in Cleveland, but I heard all about the shit. And let's get right into it, because I got a bunch of questions to ask.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have David on our program as well. So I met David at Tracker School. David Hogrefe, welcome to the show. David's background. Hey, man, just so everybody knows, David's background is as a forest firefighter, which I can't think, it's been in the news now. It seems like every year it becomes a bigger and bigger concern. And just, hanging out and talking with David and camp about it, kind of getting real insight as to, the business and the challenges that he has, and some of the challenges we as a nation face with this. And actually the world, I guess, I don't know if you've been following the news, but this is happening over in Europe too now. Europe was burning. So it's just crazy. This is, I think, I'm really excited, but I think the information he has, I think, is important to disseminate. I think there's a lot of, this can become political very quickly for a lot of people, which is unfortunate, because it's a real practical thing that we need to tackle, as a society here. And like I said, it's just beyond that, it's just kind of a super badass career to have. So David, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Joe. And if you don't mind, I'll give a little background about myself, tell them about myself first, and then we'll sort of get into what I do and what I'm seeing in the world. My name's David Hogrefe. I'm a wildland firefighter based out of Florida. I live in Lecanto. It's a small town about 65 miles north of Tampa. That's usually where people will pick it up. West Coast, Central Florida. I've been doing this for 15 years now. Pretty much after I got out of high school, I started going into fire training. Worked with the Park Service, did that for 10 years on their fire teams, got a lot of experience with that. After that, I got an opportunity. It took a few years to set up, but got the chance to go over to South Sudan, Africa. Worked on 70 fires for a whole season over there, living in the brush, tracker kind of stuff. You would get it. It was pretty great. Lots of practical skills living out there for months. Then came back and started a fire contracting company with the U.S. Forest Service and a nonprofit. My fire contracting, we go around the U.S. I've been to 40 states on wildfires and prescribed burning all over the Southeast. And then the nonprofit is focused back in Africa, working with preserves. So we got a 12,000 acre preserve in South Sudan that we helped set up, and locals run and manage. But that's a little about me, and then about what I do as wildland firefighter. It's kind of a weird career to some people. Some people don't even know it exists. They just see the fires and they think structural departments, your usual urban guys, go fight them. And some of them do. But this is actually the other side. We say we fight fire from the woods to the asphalt. Structure fights it from the asphalt to the woods. We both overlap. We have to save structures in the woods, and they have to fight woods around structure. But ultimately, every year I've been going out doing this for 15 years now. We're noticing that the fires are extending their seasons. Used to be they wouldn't call us from Florida out west till late July or August. This time of year, they'll start picking up. And then it would go into September, maybe early October, but then it would die down. The last couple of years, it's been extending into June, And this year, even we were out there in April in New Mexico. Spent
Wow.
over a month between April into May. Actually, practically before I got to Tracker, I'd just gotten back a week or two ahead of that. And then spent a week at Tracker. Florida's been getting a lot of rain. We're wet this time of year. This is our rainy season, but good for prescribed burning. But the West is starting to pick up again and again. The Southwest is still burning. Areas we were working at were 400 days since rain. So they're in a mega drought. And even when they get rain, it may be an inch, and that's all they get for the year. So we're seeing the climate and the conditions changing and worsening. You see it on the news. California every year, bigger fires, more intense fires, longer lasting. So there's plenty to talk about, but yeah, go ahead and shoot me a question if you like.
Let me go first with this, because first of all, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
You don't know me from Adam, but you know, you're a friend of Joe, and believe me, man, Joe needs all the friends he can get.
He's got a lot of Tracker friends.
Yeah, good. So I got 1,000 questions, but I'm going to cue in on one you just brought up that I wouldn't even have known to ask. So you
Shoot.
fight from the forest out. How do you get in? Well, first of all, tell me, how do you get from Florida to,
Mhm.
let's just say it's California. And then
Yeah.
how do you get into the fire, and what equipment, what do you do?
Well, I focus mostly with engines, but we attack with engines, heavy equipment, air attack, and hand crews. So some crews will just fly out as a person and they'll work the ground with hand tools. I focus on engines, so I drive an engine out there with my crew, usually a couple engines. We'll take a strike team from Florida, which is 3+ engines. We'll drive all the way from Florida to California. We've driven all over this country, so we get paid to see it. It's a cool vacation in a way, but a lot of road time. We'll get to the fire, check into the incident. And if it's a small incident, it might just be a handful of guys. They're going to give you a briefing, tell you what's going on, and then plug you in on that fire where you'll be best utilized. But I've been to fires in California and other areas out west where we'll have 2,000-3,000 people on it. And you're a tiny piece of a cog that's working like an army trying to put this out. And there you go through massive briefings, a whole check-in and demobilization process throughout it. And then, yeah, you're going to work a tiny little piece. You may only see a couple thousand acres out of a 1,000,000-acre fire, but that's going to be your ground, and they'll move you around as needed. And we'll drive in as far as we can. When we can't from there, we'll either plumb it by finding a source of water, setting up a pump, running a hose lay, or take tools off our truck, chainsaws, hand tools, and go in and put line, start cutting around it.
Do you wear an asbestos suit for heat protection? And
what we wear is called Nomex. So it's a fire resistant fabric. Level 3A is what we utilize most of the time. And there's different thicknesses of it, depending how hot, if it's wintertime or summertime, more breathability. But ultimately, it's a type of fabric that won't catch and melt on you. You don't want to be going into a fire wearing a nylon jumpsuit. You'll be shrink wrapped pretty much. It doesn't come off your skin. So you want natural fibers or non-burnable fibers. Back in the day, they used to use denim and wool. Those were the kind of things, full cotton, leather gloves. We still use leather gloves, but otherwise Nomex shirt, Nomex pants, 8-inch leather lace-up boots, non-steel toe if you don't want it to heat up. And then we'll wear hard hat and basic PPE, eye, ear protection. We don't usually use respirators like the scuba type units they use for structure, but we're breathing in more carbon-based ash, so it's like a giant campfire. Now, if a house is burning or something, we'll make sure we stay out of that smoke. You don't want to be breathing pink and purple smoke. That's not good for you.
it was your initial training, like say what the Chicago Fire Department would go to, because they're considered one of the greatest fire departments in the world. From what I know.
Sure. Our focus is different. We do take structural classes, so we are trained in how to use SCBAs, how to work around houses and structures. But
Okay.
if we come to a house and we're doing structure defense, if more than a quarter of it is involved, we're not going to be attacking it. Our trucks don't have the foam, the water, or the resources to put it out. So our main focus is stop the fire before it even gets to the house. And my background in training is the wildland, so more like your forest services. They're going to be teaching you in the woods. A lot of it was prescribed burning, especially in the Southeast. So we're taught how to fight fire with fire. One of the best ways to control it is taking that fire triangle and realizing you got to remove the heat, the oxygen, or the fuel. Well, if you've already burnt the fuels out of ahead of it, it can no longer consume them. And when you're doing that, you're taking one of those lags out and collapse the fire. So prescribed fire is a great way. And in wildland fire, fighting the big ones, we do a lot of burnouts, but it has to be the right conditions. Otherwise, you're going to have to go straight suppression.
Wow. Yeah, I remember as a kid, I'm a lot older than both of you guys, really. The Smokey the Bear commercials about basically
Sure.
don't smoke, right?
Yeah.
Only you can prevent forest fires.
Mhm.
And even though I lived in Cleveland, where, well, they had like the metro parks, but I don't ever remember a fire. But it
Yeah.
always struck me. And then we would see on the nightly news, at least once a year, massive fires mainly California, it seemed that we saw on TV. And sometimes they'd have to bring in aircraft, to drop water because it was getting out of hand. As a matter of fact, I believe now I don't want to, I'll say this. I think it may have been because of a forest fire, but I know it was a fire. But the legendary basketball player Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, his house burned down. He was I'm a jazz guy. He was a jazz musician. He lost all of his records and a lot of memorabilia of himself. So this has always been something that fascinated me as a kid, because I don't know, a forest is just so gigantic, and I just don't understand how people can contain those fires.
The span.
Yeah.
Well, we always try to tell people, start looking at it like a box, which is what we want to put around it. We try to contain it in the box. So if you put it in a square around it, could be any shape fire, but put a square, find the closest roads, natural mineral breaks, water, and draw a box around this. You're then going to focus keeping it in that box by tacking its back in fire. Fire moves with the wind or with the terrain. So you don't want to be up terrain of a fire, upslope. Fire moves upslope much quicker than downslope. You also don't want to be upwind of a fire. It's going to move much faster with the wind than backing into it. So we'll attack the backing side, then work around its flank, enveloping it, and then try to pinch off the head or push the head towards a natural break. Now, like 2 years ago, this was 2020, I was on the August complex in Northern California, and that was the first fire in California that broke 1 million acres consecutive in one fire. It took us 5.5 hours to drive from the south end to the north end on decent roads. I mean, there's multiple counties burnt. And when you have a fire like that, you're not really pushing it. You're trying to make natural breaks, put in big back burns at night when you can, and utilize the lower intense conditions that you can get. Most of the times you're getting winds 30, 40 mile an hour all the time out there. Even at night, it's 20, 25 mile an hour winds. So you do more at night, but if you get a lull in that weather where the wind drops 10, 15, that's the day you get really aggressive, you start attacking it. If you do get any moisture, you go and attack it. Otherwise, you're getting people out of the way and trying to slow its spread, or at least force it to go in a direction that's going to cause less destruction. Because there's times when you can't stop nature. You bring in those aircraft like you're talking about, the VLATs, those things can drop tens of thousands of gallons of retardant in one drop. And you think, oh, that's going to put it out for sure, right? Sometimes it jumps right over that retardant drop, or that retardant drop is there for a day or two and then it works right around it. So you can dump millions of dollars on these fires and barely do anything if the conditions are extreme. One thing I did want to say, you were mentioning the old Smokey Bear campaigns. In Florida here, I'm part of the Central Florida Prescribed Fire Council. We focus a lot on prescribed fire, and we've tried to change over the year. Only you can prevent forest fires to only you can prevent wildfires. A lot of the issues we're seeing out west and anywhere in the country is Florida, especially, we'll start here, it's my hometown, my home state, is a fire dependent community. Before man settled here, we would have lightning strikes that would start thousands of fires up and down the state every spring and early growing season. Those fires would burn millions of acres, and approximately every 2 to 4 years, all the fire type ecosystems in the state of Florida would burn over and over again for thousands and thousands of years since we've come out of the ocean. Men start coming in and developing, though, we suppress those fires. We don't want our houses to burn down or our communities. So they started suppressing fire, and the Smokey the Bear campaign originally was to stop all fire, which now we know actually caused more damage. Had we listened to the Native Americans and the old ranchers ahead of us, we would have learned that this stuff needs to burn or it's going to get out of hand. And Florida has a great campaign, so does Texas and a lot of the South, on pushing prescribed fire to do it at a time of year where you can control it and keep the intensity low. That way we don't get these massive destructive wildfires that absolutely do wipe out an ecosystem and wipe out communities. What we're seeing a lot out west, the Southwest, everything from Utah and Colorado down to the border of Mexico over to the Pacific Ocean, has had a lot of fire suppression, and now they're running into a massive drought, multi-year drought, some of the worst they've ever seen. So with 60, 70 years of fire suppression out there, not letting anything burn, the fuel buildup has increased and increased. It's like dropping a layer of leaves every year, and it keeps building and building. If you put a campfire and you have 3 feet of logs there, you're going to get a decent sized campfire. But if you put 12 feet of logs on that campfire, you're going to have a massive campfire. Yeah. And that's what we're seeing out west, these 70-year plus buildup of fuels, and they get these extreme drought conditions, extreme weather, and the changing of their climate. Now we're getting fires we can't control. And that's where good fire, we like to say, helps prevent bad fire. And the Native Americans were masters of it. They used to do it all the time in California. But as they and civilization encroached upon them, they were pushed out, civilization came in. That has caused a lot of problems. And now we're realizing and looking back, actually, we should study the ways of grandfather, of the trackers, of the natives who were there before, because they understood how the system needed to be managed if man is to live in nature.
That's very articulate. I mean, it's you're making. I mean, I never heard this before, so this is to me very thought-provoking. Now, I'm going to ask not a loaded question. I'm going to ask a question you may not be able to answer,
Sure.
but out of all these fires per year, how many do we think are actually man-made? Like, somebody did it either intentionally or unintentionally, but how many of it are man-made as opposed to natural?
Well, as we get more and more people, that number is going up. In Florida here, I would still say the majority are lightning fires, but in places out west where you don't get a lot of lightning, the majority are man-made. So many of these mega fires are, human-made. It's hard to say state by state you're going to have more causes. I mean, a guy dragging a chain down the road, not probably hooked to his trailer, throwing little pieces of hot metal off on the side of the road in the desert, that can start a grass fire real quick. And that's not a intentional fire, but it's man-made. I mean, heck, you throw a beer bottle out in the right conditions and the sun hits it, that started fires. Little bits of glass, a guy cutting with a chainsaw without a good spark arrestor starts a fire. And then you have people just being totally careless, throwing cigarettes and matches and not putting out their campfires. And then the intentional arsonist. And it just keeps going up every year. We're seeing more and more of that. People are careless and don't care about the environment.
Well, one of the things growing up in the inner city, we were always taught about pollution and don't litter. I mean, that was our thing. Try to keep things clean. Don't do the graffiti and I can imagine if I was a child raised in these, like maybe where you are or California, probably would have been the same story about don't light a match, don't do this, don't do that. We were never taught that stuff because it didn't really pertain to our situation. But yeah, it's critical. I'm not a big nature guy per se. I'm a city guy, but I do love when I see some scenic views. I look at it, I'm like, wow, it's so majestic, right? It's so pretty. And when I hear like 1 million acres burning, that bothers me. For sure. And again, one of those things, like we say, the good fire and the bad fire. 1 million acres burnt with one of these mega fires where it's just ripping 100,000 acre runs in 24-hour period. That's a crown fire. So you have the ground fuels and the top of the trees burning at the same time. When that happens, it kills not only the trees, but the heat in there can be several thousand degrees and can kill your seed bed. Soil down 8 inches is just sterilized. And when that happens, the recovery is just non-existent. If you do a good prescribed fire with lower intensity, not getting in the top of the trees, just consuming the surface fuels, it won't kill the seed bed and it will have a quicker recovery. And the forest will many times come back much, much healthier, depending on what kind of ecosystem it is and how much rain they get per year. In the moist environments like we have down in Florida, where we get a lot of rain, tropical, semi-tropical, here, our recovery can be a matter of months. If we did a fire right now, within 3 to 4 months, you would barely know we had a fire. It's full green again. Areas like California, where they may only get 10, 15 inches on a good year, it's a much slower recovery, but the lower intensity will still recover much faster. So again, keeping that intensity down, keeping the fuel loading down, and allowing fire to do its natural cycle, but at the right time of year and not out of control is a huge factor in protecting the environment. That's Joe, you have questions?
Well, I think the thing is too, is that, when you hear these things, you're like, well, why aren't we doing control fires? It seems like the obvious thing to do, but some of our conversations before, and I think we should get into this for the people who are listening, is that there are a lot of, how shall I say, societal things and people get in the way of allowing you to do, because I mean, it's a calculated risk to do a controlled burn, right?
Absolutely.
And it's going to scare people. If my house is in the woods and I find out 1 mile from here, you're lighting up the forest, I might try to put a stop to that, not realizing that you're trying to prevent me from the big fire. I mean, what are some of the things? So yeah, obviously, it seems like we have the solution. We know how to manage this, but yet you're not able to do that. So what are some of the issues you're working through in that regard?
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned earlier a little bit about politics, and that's big. Each state has their own rules and regs. It's not a national law on how to do a prescribed burn, or even if it's legal, or how you legally can do so. So for myself, I'm a certified prescribed burn manager in Florida, RXP2 nationally, and that allows me the opportunity to go and do this. But I've taken years of training to get to that point, and I know, especially in Florida in the Southeast, where I focus on prescribed fire, what I have to do. And we have what's called a prescription. Instead of calling it just a controlled burn, that's why we call it prescribed. And people are like, wait, you get medicine to go burn? Like, no, it's a write-up. Like you would get an RX script, but ours are anything from 6 to 24 pages, depending on complexity. And it's telling you the weather conditions you need, what equipment you need, the people you need, how long since rain, everything that you need to do this, how wide your fire breaks need to be. And you have to run things. We have smoke plotters and pretty much algorithms on the computer that will tell us where the smoke goes, and like fire behave models that tells us exactly how the fire should behave, flame lengths, rate of spread, all that kind of stuff before we even do it. So we know how bad this fire could be if we put fire on the ground under these conditions. A lot goes into that, which the public doesn't see. All the public sees is big flames that are scary and a smoke plume going up that's near my house. So then you get the calls to 911. Hey, there's a fire. Do you guys know about it? And of course, we let 911 and all our local emergency management know before we do it. So they are aware, but still that public backlash from people who don't understand fire can be very hard, especially in states that don't have fire programs like Florida. Even here, we get 1,000 people a day moving into Florida who aren't from here. Those people come in and all of a sudden move to a community that's used to fire. They're from a state that doesn't burn. They're like, what is this? So of course they're calling and saying, hey, stop this. I don't like it. Are they killing the animals? And we always try to tell them we manage for the species, not the individual. Fire may kill some animals, but if you do it properly and you leave gaps for the wildlife, you do it back in fire, it is very minimal. And the species that remain will be way more healthy and benefited from that fire, and the carrying capacity goes way up after a fire.
Who generates all this information, these computer programs, and who tells you all this and sends you out?
So with us in Florida, it's the Florida Forest Service is the one we get our authorizations from. For sending out west on the wildfire, it's the U.S. Forest Service. So generally your local Forest Service, state and federal level, will be the ones who put a lot together, and many agencies are involved in calculating all this. But we put it together and we've been saving over years. Florida's fire program goes back, 100 years, U.S. Forest Service to 1905. And before that, we had just local knowledge from ranchers and natives and those who did it. And compiling that data, especially with the internet now, and putting it out there so other agencies can use, it's just layering upon layering. The computer technology that we have now, from infrared to satellite to just the different options for weather, is almost unlimited. And that allows us to get more technical as we do this as well. So we're trying to share it with other states. And in fact, a lot of Florida burners have gone to California and they've helped start their fire councils and the prescribed burn programs. And their numbers are going up every year. But to give a comparison, Florida burns anywhere from 2 to 5 million acres a year. California on average is doing 30 to 80,000 acres a year for prescribed fire. And California is 2.5 times their size. So there's a long way to go. And it's a slow process with all the restrictions and the politics that can get in the way.
Unbelievable.
And also, isn't insurance a big thing? You were talking about that.
Yep.
Because I mean, there is always a small chance
Yeah, absolutely.
something could go wrong. I mean, fire is fire, right? And you can't calculate all the variables. And so talk about that a little bit and how that,
Sure.
the difficulties there.
So in Florida, you can get what's called fire insurance. You can get it in a lot of states. Most focus on the wildfire. So if you're sending an engine or a crew out there, they have insurance that protects you, but you're not lighting a wildfire, you're putting it out. So your liability is way down on that. When you're lighting the fire, and I think it's something like 0.01 or 0.02% of prescribed burns get out, but those are the ones that you hear about. So, 99 in 100 never cause a problem. In fact, even 1 in 1,000 is more likely to be the problem. But that one problem is what makes the insurance skyrocket. And it used to be you could get a decent policy in the Southeast for, 10, 20 grand a year. Now that number, if you need, $2-3 million coverage, good umbrella, and I don't know all the ins and outs of insurance, don't want to talk stuff about the underwriters. They know it better than I do. I just pay for it. But we have to go together now as multiple companies to be able to do this, because it can be $200,000 to $300,000 a year to get prescribed burn insurance in the Southeast. And there's the states coming out trying to get simpler, cheaper solutions like we used to have. But because of fires in California and out west that are getting worse and worse and burning down homes, even though those are wildfire, it's causing the price of a policy for prescribed burner to skyrocket. So again, that's almost pricing out the work that could solve the problems of the West. So it's almost a circular reasoning of why they're raising your prices, actually causing the problem that could make it worse and make Florida like California. And so besides nature, we already have to deal with climate change and nature with this kind of stuff. And now you're throwing in insurance and politics, and that's not exactly something we can control either.
Well, and that's another reason why I wanted to have you on the show, because I was like, man, people need to know about this to understand that, like, yeah, basically we're kind of getting in our own way with this. Like you said, they're
For
looking
sure.
at the wildfires and then they're
Mhm.
applying that to the insurance of the, the prescribed
Yeah.
burns, and basically in some ways like creating more of a likelihood that they're going to have a wildfire.
For
It's
sure.
very frustrating to hear that, and I
Yeah.
think people need to know that's kind of, I mean, I just, I can't fathom the kind of dollars that you guys as a company have to do with, like I said, just the insurance alone.
For sure.
So, obviously, like you mentioned Africa, talk a little bit about that. How did you get involved working in Africa?
Okay, well, I've been studying Tom's book since I was 12. So I always wanted to get out in remote places off the grid as far away as possible. And being a park ranger, I got to see a lot of that around the country in Florida, living in the Everglades. I worked down in the Everglades an awful lot. And that's one of the most remote spots in South Florida, but it's, encroached on all sides by people. But you got about 3 million acres of wilderness, and you can get pretty dark, pretty out there and feel, back to nature kind of stuff, but you're actually working like the natives did. And I was like, where could you go on Earth that would be like that? And so, Google search is your friend. I started searching, and this was back in like 2012, 2013, of what's some of the most off-grid countries left on the planet. South Sudan kept coming up. It was this newer nation founded in 2005, split away from the North after a generational long genocide war between the North and the South. And I won't get into all of that. But this area, they said, is pretty much as old Wild West back in the day as you could get. No grid. It's a country the size of Texas with 11 miles of road. At least back when I was going there. I mean, so it's very out there. There were no cell towers, no power, no running water. You didn't have any of that. And so I started talking to nonprofits over there in different groups, from Doctors Without Borders, Red Cross, pioneers, anything from engineers to pilots to medical to missionaries. Hey, how do you get over here to get to one of these kind of places? Because I see you're a fire type ecosystem with lots of fires, and this is what I do. And I'd love to live off grid out here. And it took a couple of years. Most of them didn't even reply to me. But if you're persistent, like anything in life, you'll get people to start talking to you and pointing you in different directions. And I think it was about 2013, I had finally gotten a hold of some groups, and they said, hey, our 3 big issues over here are security, water, and fire. Security, because they're coming out of a war and they still have tribal wars. So there's a lot of issues there. Water, because it's a monsoonal kind of community. They get massive amounts of rain for a short period of time, and water's everywhere, but it's not safe to drink. Or then it dries up for 7 to 8 months of an extreme dry season. That's pretty much American Southwest kind of conditions. High winds, triple-digit temperatures, and single-digit relative humidities. So it dries up, and then the locals light everything on fire. It's part of their tradition. They've been doing it for thousands of years. Africa alone burns several billion acres a year. It makes America fires look tiny. It's a massive continent, absolutely massive. And when these people are going out there burning for just clearing their fields, for pushing game for hunting, or making it easier to walk because the grasses can grow 6 to 12 feet a year over there. So when you're walking these savannas, it's like going through a jungle of grass, and they'll burn it so it's easier to come back through. But they don't light it as we do and keep it in a box. They light it and let whoever's downwind deal with it. So now you have nonprofits from engineers and pilots and doctors and everybody building compounds there, helping to stabilize the region or work with the people. And these fires are running through their compounds, and they're just having to get out of the way. Come back to your, solar panels and your camp burned down. It's a problem to them. So I went over there as a prescribed burner and said, hey, I can come and secure your compounds and work with you guys and get to know the area. And that was my in. And I ended up going over there, spending almost 4 months. 2015, a couple of years later, they had an insurrection at the Capitol, and I couldn't get a visa to go over there. So the challenges of going to these places are quite a thing. You have to have someone inside the country vouch for you just to get a visa even. And then it can be kicked out in a minute if the government's like, no, we don't like what's going on. No Americans right now, no Westerners. So there's a challenge of getting there. But once we got in and I started the nonprofit, started working with these guys and did tactical burnouts around all these compounds, I would live out of a backpack with a jungle hammock and hike with the locals through the savannah there. From the Low Peak Mountain to the Blue Nile, all the way over to Imachek and then Kampala, even to the Ugandan border. And fire after fire, you'd be with these people, and I would just go on my map, like, where's a compound from one of these people I'm working with? I'll do a burnout ahead of it when they light these fires, and I'll just stay there till the fire passes. And I made quite the relationship with these guys, and Tom's skills from when I was a kid, learning his books, were absolutely critical just to keep you alive in that environment. But it's sort of a tracker and wildland firefighter haven. I mean, it's just a magnificent country, 2,000 to 4,000 foot mountains running into a wet savanna, then going into the Blue Nile, then going to a dry savanna all the way up to the Nuba Mountains, which are like desert mountains in the north. A magnificent area, absolutely. And it is totally off grid. More encroachment from city is coming in the last 8 years or so since I've been there. But yeah, great place. And I could tell stories about that forever, but I'll back to you for a minute.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's amazing. I'm surprised you ever came back. That just sounds like
Pretty much I waited for the last flight out of there when the monsoon started hitting again, and the pilots were like, Well, we won't be able to fly in because the cow field we land in is going to be so much mud, we'll get stuck. So you either leave this time or we'll see you in, the next dry season. And I'm like, I probably should get out of here. So, and I've been back now 3 other times since then. I try to go at, every year, every 2 years, depending on when I can get visas and if it's stable, like COVID stopped it, or if they're having issues over in the country.
And you're doing prescribed burns around these like NGO facilities by yourself, just a one man?
Well, I would get the locals. I started by myself and then found the locals who do their own burns and pretty much started a hand crew with them. Just told them what I was doing. A lot of the compounds want to learn it as well. So I was teaching doctors and engineers how to do prescribed burning and pretty much doing training programs with them. And we would put a hand line in all the way around the compound, wait for milder weather conditions, start real early in the morning or do it overnight, and then back burn around those compounds and pretty much make like a giant donut of black. And then we'd put it all out and just leave that. So that when a wildfire comes and hits that compound, it would hit that black and then just die. And you just stand there, it gets smoky and hazy inside the compound, but nothing's at risk. You would just patrol it while that's happening, make sure no long range embers are dropping in, catching anything inside there. But if you have 150 to 300 feet of black, some places several hundred yards, depending on the fuels, when that fire hits it, it just drops instantly. And there's no risk for at least another season till those grasses grow back.
And how long is an operation like that? Is that like you mentioned, is it like a multi-day, or does it vary on the size of the compound, I imagine? Like how?
Absolutely. Varies on the compound, but it is very rare to do a prescribed burn that lasts more than a day. For Florida perspective, just last Friday, I burnt 250 acres here over on the east coast of Florida. And there were 12 of us out there, so it's not a one-man job. But, we had that done in 7.5 hours. We've had days where if you have a lot of crew, a lot of equipment, can move fast, several thousand acres can be done on the ground in one day. And if you have aerial resources, like we'll use helicopters with aerial ignition devices, you can burn 10, 20,000 acres a day if you have the right fuels and equipment.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because you just struck something from one of our conversations. Where they literally drop ignition sources, so you're not just. Okay.
So usually what we'll use is what's called the Dades machine. It's PLDO, and ultimately it looks like a ping pong ball, and inside of it has potassium permanganate, and they're injecting it with a needle filled with glycerin. And with the right amount mixtured in there, it causes an exothermic reaction. And ultimately that will then delay burn. It will start to heat up till it hits the point where it bursts into fire, and then burn at several thousand degrees. And it'll be like a little ball of fire dropped where you want it. And it'll start a point source ignition every time you drop one of those. And we'll grid out an area, closer to the line, then work a little farther apart. You can change out the spacing or the speed of the drop to determine how intense you want that fire. And a helicopter can move way faster. Otherwise, we're on the ground, either lighting by foot or with like an ATV or UTV. But a helicopter is going to move way faster and cover the ground much more simply than you can. So for large fires and large burnouts, it's a great way. It's just more expensive. So it's usually only an agency operation.
This is just fascinating to me. I mean, I never knew that this technology, well, that's where, the old expression comes from, you fight fire with fire.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yep. That's totally where it comes from. Yeah. The natives that taught this. You read books from way back, like Kit Carson and the Mountain Man days, and they'll tell stories where the Indians would fight wars with each other, lighting fires and using that to push people away or give a smoke screen for cover. And Kit Carson used that to save him and several wagon trains going out there by learning from the natives so that they could get away. And absolutely. So that was like a war method of fighting fire with fire. But the same thing, the natives knew if their village was at risk, you either move out of the way of the fire or you burn out of ahead of it. And that fire will do the fighting for you. You just have to secure the backside around you, and then it pushes towards it. And as two fires get closer, because they're fighting for heat, oxygen, and fuel are the three legs of the triangle. And so the heat is what they're producing, consuming that fuel, flashpoint. The oxygen is from the air that they're sucking down. And then the fuel is what's below it they're consuming. And as that fuel gets less and less, and the oxygen is less and less between two fires, they will draw together and run together and then explode straight up, because both sides are fighting for what is in the middle. And the Indians and any wildland firefighter will know that when you have a fire coming at you, as long as you can build enough defendable space that's black between what you're protecting and that fire, those backing fire and that head fire will suck together. And you could have long range spotting. You got to keep that in mind, but it will at least protect what is behind you that you're trying to defend. In fact, a famous fire from way back, the Man Gulch Fire. There's a lot of stories about that. Some smoke jumpers got killed in it. And in that story there, the only ones who survived were the ones who he struck a match to waist high grass running out of time. There's a song and saying about it. When he did that, the grass ran up the hill. He jumped into the black from his match, and he and 2 others survived by getting into the rocks in the burnout areas. The others who just tried to make a run for it didn't make it.
Jeez.
Yeah, how fast can that fire move? So if things go south,
Sure.
like you said, you can't outrun it, right? It's moving like a train,
It
basically.
all depends. If you're on the head fire side, it's all terrain or wind driven. So if now in New Mexico, where I was just at in April and May, we had 57 to 58 mile an hour sustained winds for a day, 2 days at a time out there. Extreme weather. When that's happening, no, you cannot outrun it. If you have a little 3 to 5 mile an hour wind, yeah, you can outrun it. We measure it in what we call chains. So a chain is 66 feet. That's an old fire term. So we do it in like chains per hour. And ultimately, when the fire starts moving at over 10 to 15 miles per hour, that's the point where you've got to have a vehicle to really outrun it, because it may not seem very fast, but it's moving at a whole flank, and it may have fingers up ahead of you. And then on top of that, a fire will do what's called spotting, where it throws an ember ahead of itself and starts another fire. So now you have the fire front moving and the spots progressing fire ahead of itself. And at that point, yeah, it's real fast. So you need to have black between yourself and the fire, or be able to get around to a flank or the back where it's moving at a much slower pace, expanding outwards or pushing backwards in the wind. And those go very slow. A backing fire is rarely going to move at more than a mile or 2 miles per hour.
Well, let me ask this now, this black section that you're talking about, generally speaking, how big of a section does that have to be to stop a fire from, jumping over it or getting through it?
Sure. Well, one thing we always want is, at least you look at the fuels that are burning, you want something at the minimum of 4 times the height of that fuel. Because whatever that fuel is going to have, it's going to have flames coming off the top, usually 1.5 times its height. So if you have at least 4, you can stop direct flame and pinch it. Now you have to look at the fuels. Like in Florida, we have our state tree is called the cabbage palm, and it's actually a grass, but it's got these huge fronds that are on it, and they can catch fire, lift with the convective column, and carry for long distance burning, and then drop. And that can cause half mile, 3/4 mile spotting. So obviously that just starts a whole nother fire in and of itself. But to get away or protect yourself, minimum of 4 times the fuel height. So if you've got tall timber next to you, that's, 60, 70 feet tall, let's, use 100-foot timber for this scenario, big ones out west. You would want at least 400 feet of space burnt out or clear to have a chance to be safe from potential extreme fire.
Jeez.
Now we get these firestorms out west that are having these extreme flames, 100, 150, 200-foot flames. Some even have more than that. I mean, you go out in the redwoods in some of these areas, California, the ponderosa pines, these things are heading towards 200 foot tall. When those things are burning, you really don't have enough safety zone. You just need to get out of that area. But those also have a canopy fire and an understory. So with fires in Florida, if you have a fast moving fire, usually that's in a grassy, flashy fuel. Like the Midwest, the big grass fires there, grass in the Southwest, chaparral, those can move at extreme rates. 20, 30 mile an hour fire is not uncommon, but they're lower fuels. So if you can make a couple acre black around what you want to defend, they're usually good. Just watch for long range spotting. But again, at minimum 4 times the height of the fuel that you're in.
Unbelievable. It's just
good stuff to know for tracker kind of things if you're ever out in the fire. I talked to some of the guys up at Tracker, because New Jersey, well, we were actually there at one of the classes. They had a 15,000 acre wildfire just the other side of the Pine Barrens. And I was actually talking to some friends while I was out there, like, you're in New Jersey, aren't you, Dave? Come on over. And I'm like, I'm a little committed right now. I didn't bring my gear. But I mean, even states you wouldn't think, New Jersey, right? They don't get a lot of fires. Sure enough, they got some large woods there, and they had some pretty intense fire. It was actually one of the largest they'd had in 15 years. So again, they were worried about a lot of structures. Had it gotten out of the Pine Barrens, it could have been a big problem.
Now, what do you do now in the lulls, in the off season, or with days off or whatever? I mean, what do you do?
Well, one thing is our job is controlled by the weather. So a lot of times we'll work 2-3 months in a row, every day of the week. On a fire, we'll go out and run what they call 14s or 21s. We'll work 14 days straight, 10 to 16 hour days, sometimes longer if you need a double shift. You can extend to 21, then take 2 off, and then come back and do it over and over again. But then, like you said, you get times of year where fire goes out. In the west and the north, you get snow, nothing's going on. In the south here, we get our real rainy season, and that puts it out. Those times we're either training, working on equipment, or I do things like going to Tracker. I'm always outdoors. So I was just out this past week. It's been a little quiet. Thursday, Friday, we did fire, but the rest of the time was slow. So I was out scouting and tracking, gathering wild edibles. I'm always out in the woods doing Tracker kind of things. And it allows you times to improve yourself. A lot of guys will take side jobs. We do a lot of prescribed burning in Florida. So if we're not out doing wildfires, we're doing prescribed burning, prepping, writing prescriptions for them, or just taking time off, building skills.
Cool.
So it's a fun job. You know, you work a lot and then you get time off. So it's nice when it lines up with classes and I can go to tracker or do things like that.
This is a great guest you brought on today, Joe. I mean, who does this? You know,
It's a small tribe of us around the country.
yeah, it's so neat to have that little niche, you know, and it's so valuable. It's not like a little niche that just gets together and crochets blankets or something. This is
Sure.
like serious, I mean, life-saving, not just life-saving, but earth-saving skills. It's just amazing. It really is.
Well, yeah, I
Thank
was
you.
sitting around, we were sitting around the fire talking at trucker school, like,
Mhm.
I gotta get this guy. Like, we need to talk to this dude because
Tell
it's just
stories.
like, yeah, it's just,
Campfire stories are great.
but yeah,
I remember, well, we've had a firefighter around here, one of my students. He's a firefighter in an EMT.
Mhm.
And I've had several friends that were Chicago firefighters and suburban Chicago firefighters. And they're and actually, well, not so much the Chicago ones, the suburbanites, they don't go on that many fire calls. They
Mhm.
it's more medical emergencies and so on.
Absolutely.
But yeah, because you know, with the building structures and all the, you know, the advances that we've made. But the way that they fight fires in Chicago, I guess, is slightly different than some other cities. But
Sure.
what you're doing is at a whole nother level here. It seems
It's totally different. I respect
Yeah.
those guys though. I mean,
Oh,
their
sure.
amount of training they have to go in what they're burning in urban environments. Our stuff isn't as toxic. I always feel like we're fighting fire in what's natural. And yeah, we suck in the smoke, you cough. Certain plants are a lot worse than others. And that's a whole nother story of how it affects us. But those guys, when you're dealing with the carcinogens, just a car has so many things that can kill you. I want to say and I wouldn't know it as well as they do, but the old trainings I took, seems like there's 600 things in a car that if you breathe them in, they can kill you. When we go in the woods, we don't have that kind of stuff. I mean, you do have to deal with people having meth labs, throwing junk and trash out there, propane tanks that people dump that still have fuel in them. I mean, that's an issue out there. And we have to deal with those as hazards. But I always respect the structure guys, and they always say the same about us, that we're crazy for going out in 10,000 acre fires. But we sometimes say they're crazy for running into a building that's got 20,000 things that can kill you in it. So a lot of respect for those guys.
Yeah, the roof, it can, one of my buddies got caught in a collapsed roof and he
Yeah,
didn't get killed or anything, but he got injured. And yeah, a lot of things. I mean, it's tough to be a firefighter of any kind, but
for
what,
sure.
what
Yeah.
you're doing just seems more, yeah, it's so large. It's, you know, it's on
Mhm.
such a grand scale.
Yeah, vast.
That, you know, I can't fathom the number, like when you said 1,000,000 acres, you know,
Yeah.
that's mind-boggling to me, the
It's hard
size.
to put in a box, that's for sure. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, I would imagine. It's just, but you know, we need people like you know, it's just fantastic. You know, it's fantastic. That you know, that you did this, because who would have thought of, I never would have thought of bringing on because honestly, like with California, I just thought they grabbed the regular firemen, you know,
Sure. A
from
lot
like
of those
LA.
guys do come out, but yeah, there's a whole bunch of us around the country, and a lot of us know each other. The longer you're doing this, 15 years that I've been doing it now, you get to know people from every state, and you'll see the same people over and over. Now, there's thousands of us, and you don't know all of them, plus new guys coming in. But I mean, we utilize structure departments that have at least the basic wildland training. We even utilize military. There's a lot of military soldiers they'll put through basic training, and National Guard teams will come out there. And it's interesting talking to those guys who are like, you know, just last week I was developing software for the military jets or something. And now I've got this chainsaw in my hand. And I'm like, what am I doing?
Wow.
So it's cool seeing the mixes of people we get out there. But there is a solid core of us that it's our career. This is what we do, and we love it. You'll see in a trainee when we're teaching them in the first 3 fires, they're either going to absolutely love this, and you know, they're like a little pyro that's doing it for a career, or they're going to be like, this is insane, I'm getting out of here and taking another gig. But yeah, it's one of those things you either love or hate. And if you love being out in the woods, you love being in like the most remote places that half the time you don't have access to, but in our job you do. It's a great career, but it's a tough one too. If you can make it through scout class, you'll definitely do well though.
I was going to say the reverse. It's like, I don't think you're going to have a problem with scout class. But you know, I just kind of circling back, just because you mentioned, I just want to talk some about your certifications and backgrounds. So
Mhm.
you mentioned being just a park ranger. Now that's kind of separate and apart from, or is that part of the requirements for being
No, so
wildfire?
a park ranger is again a job in the Park Service that it can cover many things. You can have interpretive rangers, law enforcement rangers, firefighter rangers, which is more what I was. And there's many specialties. Well, when I started in it, my focus I wanted to go into was fire. So I was a park ranger, but I was on what they call a burn team. And so we'd go all over South Florida, Southwest specifically where I was working. And we would do prescribed burning or other resource management, prepping fire lines, spraying exotics or dealing with exotic plants, trying to control those and keep native species, intact and dominant, doing surveys, timber surveys, things like that, writing the prescriptions. And then when wildfire season comes, we would become initial attack modules that would go and help the parks with the fires. And so doing that was my career. Pretty much every day we'd be on fires, do 100 prescribed burns a year, however many wildfires, some seasons a lot, some seasons not so much, depending, on the conditions. It used to be, it seemed like every other year would be really bad wildfires, but these last 3 or 4 years, it's been just more and more wildfires every year, bigger ones, longer lasting. So it's like, if you want to go in a wildfire, there's plenty for you in these last couple of years. But that experience is what got me into fire and got me all the training. And then I would go out west every summer, try to take a couple weeks at least and go out there. And then now that I do it full time as a contractor for the U.S. Forest Service, we have, we'll spend months out west. Some of our guys last year, I think, spent 140 days out west working on wildfires. And that's practically consecutive. They'll take a break here and there, but otherwise they're just staying out, hopping one fire to another. Incident command calling them from here, take their R&R days back to another one. You get worn out on that kind of stuff for sure. It's some long runs.
Let me ask you this. Excuse me. What's the difference between an arsonist and a pyromaniac?
Well, what we like to say is we are actually professionally trained, paid by the government, and legally allowed to do it. The other guys aren't.
Okay.
But yeah, ultimately, there's some people who just do it for spite, for pleasure. I mean, a lot of people who do fire, we love fire. I mean, if you're a tracker, you understand the value of fire in any culture. And in fact, in Africa, they think it's crazy I get paid to do this because they just call their kids, their nephew, their uncle out, and they all do a prescribed burn. Nobody gets paid. It's just part of the community. And that's how it used to be. Society in general has gotten away from fire, and now it's more of a scary thing. But in indigenous cultures, it is like the necessity of life. We know the sacred four: shelter, water, fire, food. Fire's number 3. It's part of life to everybody. So when you get like us, it becomes part of our life. It becomes our career. And you learn to love and respect fire. And in the fire community, sometimes they'll call it the dragon. You want to keep the dragon in the box. It's like it's in its cage. But when the dragon gets out of the cage, the dragon can cause a lot of damage. And that's what you see when you get these big fires. And so then we're going in there, we're trying to get this dragon back in the box. I forget one of the studies we had read before as well, when you're looking at what it requires for an organism to be called a living organism. You look at this up. I don't have all the details in front of me. I know I have a study about it somewhere in my drawer. But if you take what's required for something to say this is a living organism, fire has about 2/3 to 3/4 of those that you could say apply to it.
Really?
You can't quite say it's living, but it is a fascinating object.
Well, it
It's not
moves.
something just
it,
like, oh, fire's in my
consumes.
living room.
Yeah, I'm
It's
trying
right
to
here.
remember all those things. Yeah, I mean, it has
Yeah.
a lot of properties of a living entity.
Absolutely. It is a unique thing to deal with, but it's
It
a very valuable
multiplies.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So a few things I can say is that, it consumes oxygen, puts out carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide. It expands, it shrinks down, it lays down, it rises up, it consumes fuel, it leaves waste. All those are some of the ones that were listed by it. And all those are things that living organisms do. I mean, it's awesome. Sometimes we'll see them. I think we were even talking at Tracker about, you take a picture of fire and you don't think about it like how it's moving or what it looks like. And then you look at it later, like, man, it looks like it's an animal running across the landscape. I mean, it's fascinating, but that's more getting into the philosophy side of it. But we have lots of good campfire story talks about this. That's another podcast.
But kind of about your observation about how, when in Africa, it was so familiar that they're like, yeah, the kids just do it. Like,
Absolutely.
it's just another thing that we're kind of, modern humans are just kind of divorced from. I mean, fire, and when you're living primitively, fire is integral to your day.
You need it to survive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just, you're making a fire, you're controlling the fire. It is, it's one of those things that, yeah, in modern days, we don't need it. We have
Mhm.
other sources for our energy and our heat and our warmth.
Yeah.
And then it becomes something alien and scary because it's very powerful. And if
For sure.
if you're not used to dealing with it, then yeah, you have to outsource it. Basically, you have to have professionals who are trained to do it. And it's kind of fascinating how like we get detached from so many parts of what it was our natural state of being,
Yeah.
and that's just one example of something that was very core to our existence. I mean, yeah, you were always getting firewood. You were making fire. There was someone in the camp
cook
whose
your
job it
food,
was.
boil your water, make your
Yeah.
tools. And now, ultimately, I like to tell people what we do with our fire is it's in our wires in our house. We're burning some type of fuel to produce the electricity to put that power out there. So we are using fire, but we keep it contained in the walls of our house so we don't see it. Instead of having to have it use that fire to make the light, to heat your wood, to cook your food, to make your tools, and it was a hands-on. Now we're separated. In South Sudan, where I've worked, I've had what looks like hand crews of children, not one of them over 14, with branches in their hand they're using as a flapper. They cut a green bough, at least 3 feet long, and they use it as a swatter to beat the fire back and to sweep the ground. And they'll hold this hand line that's, I don't know, 6-8 inches of mineral, and they'll swat the fire back away from it to make sure it doesn't cross over, while their dad's up there using a grass torch lighting off the side of the mountain. And these kids are barefoot in shorts, maybe not even a shirt, and they're swatting this fire. Meanwhile, we're in America with all this gear, trucks, air tankers, everything you can imagine, and we're dealing with these fires. And I was like, look at how simple this is. They've got a branch and like a pair of shorts, and they're fighting this fire. And many times they can hold it. Sometimes it gets out, but they're like, we move around to the other side. We'll catch it over there, put another line in, they just deal with it. It's just so comfortable to them. It's amazing.
Well, here's something. Since you've been in the jungles, or not the jungles, but forests and fighting fires, or as a tracker, have you seen any evidence, or what are your thoughts on the existence of a Bigfoot character?
I get this all the time. In fact, I was asked this at tracker even.
Well, I'm asking.
I have not seen it, but there are many firefighters who say they have. But I've never seen it. I would love to find out where they saw it and go tracking it as a tracker. Yeah. I think that would be awesome. Like, show me where you saw it, because I'll tell you if it was there. But I personally haven't. But there are many who, absolutely. There's a group out there. Firefighters say we've seen him in these remote places. So.
I'm just going to come out, since we're public recording, to say I'm a skeptic of the Bigfoot, because literally he's called Bigfoot.
You would think we could track him, right?
Right. If there's evidence, if it's a being whose whole persona is based around his big feet, we should be able to find him. There's people who have the skills to find him. For sure.
The one thing I will say about the big feet, though, as a tracker, which is an interesting thing, working over in Africa, I don't know if you ever heard of Alan Savory. The Savory Institute does a bunch of amazing work in Africa, regenerating the deserts, trying to make them back into, proper landscapes. And they have turned desert back into grassland and forest. Phenomenal work. So look up Alan Savory, great guy. I've actually met him before, worked with some of his people over there. And then he actually lives in Stuart, Florida part of the time. So I've gone and had lunch with him. And that guy is a phenomenal tracker. Again, you see him over there. He has a stick in his hand. He's barefoot. He's walking around pointing at all the tracks. He was back in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. He was a game ranger, biologist. Went through the whole war, moved out of there. His place got destroyed, but he still has a game reserve there, the Dimambongi, I believe it is. And it is some of the most lush, restored, phenomenal land in Africa. And around it is all this desertifying land that's falling apart. As soon as you go there, the water is clean. It runs through there. It's got an incredible amount of topsoil and all the wildlife. And it's because of the way he manages that land. Fire is one of them. And he says that the way we can manage land naturally is rest, living organisms, and fire. Fire can be good, can be bad, depends how it's managed. And he shows that in certain conditions it's bad, but in other areas like Florida, it can actually be beneficial. The living organisms can be anything from, a tiny microbe in the ground to an elephant. And then rest is letting the land rest in between that, either the organism or the fire. And it's a phenomenal study as well, but I'm getting off topic. What I wanted to say about it, though, is he said that tracking elephants is surprisingly hard because they have such a large round foot. It leaves less of a mark than you think. And I thought, that's crazy. But then I went to South Sudan, and sure enough, I wasn't there to see it, but they told me some elephants went by where the field is where we land the aircraft. I'm like, cool, this is going to be great, easy area to go. I couldn't find a mark. Now, I'm not Tom Brown, of course. He could have found it, but I was like surprised that they didn't tear up the woods. The trees aren't pushed out of the way. You think they're snapped limbs and branches. They are surprisingly agile. But it is true that still, if there's an animal that's large, there are good trackers. We could track it. So I keep asking these firefighters, if you see it, let me know. I want to go there. Take a picture of the ground where you saw it. At least send me that. We'll analyze it. But I wandered off on a side topic there. But it's good stuff.
Well, I'm just generally Martin, who's you didn't get to meet tonight, unfortunately. Well, we're both skeptics by nature. Okay,
sure.
But we're open-minded. But so far, most of the things I've been skeptical of my life, I haven't been proven incorrect yet.
Sure.
But when I was a young boy, very young, grade school, I was big into the UFO, the ufology, the UFOs, the Bigfoot, Bigfoot stuff, Loch Ness monster, all that.
Yeah.
I read as much as I could, I used to go down to the Cleveland Public Library and read everything that I could on it. And I figured, I'm just going to have to wait a while until I grow up and get my own life experiences to like really come to a conclusion. So I started as a skeptic, and then I kind of started, well, there's some strong evidence. And then I became pretty much still a skeptic. Now I kind of reverted back because I just haven't seen anything, convincing. But I think what does hurt is when you have these phony balonies that say, oh, we found a scalp of Bigfoot, or guaranteed it's going for DNA testing, and it's all bullshit. So that kind of hurts it,
Yeah. In South Florida, in the Everglades down there, Ochopee, there's a place called the Skunk Ape Museum, which is the South Florida version of Bigfoot. And it's a cool place. They got all sorts of neat stuff there. But it also gets to that point where you wonder, like, where did you get some of the stuff? Like, I've never seen it. A lot of people in South Florida say they've seen it, but I spent months and years working around the Everglades and never saw it. And I saw some pretty interesting wildlife down there, but that was just one thing I never saw. But man, it's a cool place. You ever get to Ochopee, Florida, go check out the Skunk Ape Museum. An interesting place.
I kind of have an open invitation to go to Tampa. I know somebody that used to live out here, and now she lives down in Tampa area. I think she just moved, but still in that area. So she's invited me. I haven't been able to go anywhere because I was taking care of my mom for so long. Now that's not an issue anymore. But yeah, I've heard people too that claim they saw things, and they may have actually saw things, for sure. It doesn't mean it's Bigfoot, an unidentified object doesn't mean it's aliens, because I saw something, my whole class saw something once in the sky during the day. As a matter of fact, I'm almost 100% certain that it made the news that night, the local news, on the weather segment of it. We had a famous meteorologist in Cleveland called Dick Goddard. He sadly passed away about a year or so ago from COVID. But yeah, we saw during class time, blue skies. These lights would have been over Lake Erie. They look like actual stars that you would see at night. There was a cluster of them. I mean, quite a few of them, not one or two, maybe 10. And some of them were moving, and they were active, and some were stationary, and it was quite fascinating. And as I said, there were a cluster of them. And to this day, I don't know if there'd be any way I could research that. But yeah, because I could ballpark the year. Okay, I could guess what year within the range. It was either 6th grade, probably between when I was in 3rd and 6th grade. So I could probably narrow it down that way.
Yeah, do search.
But yeah, that was about the only thing that I can remember off the top of my head that I think was that I still can't explain it. Okay,
sure. So, this past fire we were at in New Mexico, we saw some of the Starlink stuff, and that was some crazy looking stuff. It was late one night. We were doing a night shift. I worked a lot of night shifts out there just because the intensity of the fire was way lower. So now you're on the side of a mountain, 50-mile-an-hour winds at night. It's pretty interesting. Lots of stories from that. But we looked up, and there was a line of perfectly spaced out lights moving across the sky from one horizon to the other. And we looked it up. It was a Starlink launch, one of Elon Musk. But I had never seen that many. I mean, it was a string, must have been 50 or 100 of them, perfectly lined out, arcing across the sky. And I mean, that caused some conversation at camp that night. That was for sure.
Oh yeah. I knew a guy, he was my neighbor for a while. It would have been a World War II guy. He was like a year older than my grandfather. And he was originally from Parkersburg, West Virginia, that area. And he said, he always looked up in the sky because he was raised in the country. And he said in his life, he never saw anything that he thought was out of the ordinary. And then I used to know a pilot. He passed away, sadly. He was a fighter pilot in Korea and then a commercial pilot for 30 years with American Airlines. And he never saw anything that he couldn't explain. So, and he was very candid with me about things.
Sure.
Because he used to tell me stuff like, I could tell you stories about flying that if I did, you'd never want to fly again.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure he was referring to drunk pilots, for sure. I know that now because it all came out years later, but so the couple of people that I can say know far more about the sky than I do they didn't believe in that, but who, they're just people too. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just still looking for an intelligent life every time I meet Joe. I'm like, Joe, is there any intelligent life there? Huh? That's all you can say. Huh? No, Joe's a great guy, great student. As a matter of fact, just quickly before I forget, and we can discuss this later, Joe, I got an interesting email, and I don't even know who it's from. It was a weird email thing, where it was weird how it got sent. Almost, I thought it was spam, but it was all about Stanley Rodvine. I guess whoever wrote it was not from America, but he was mentioning some things. I think he got a couple of things misunderstood about Rodvine, but yeah, it's kind of lengthy talking about his wrestling and just things like that and how tough he was. I'm like, yeah, well, I can't respond to the guy because there's no way to respond to it, but yeah, well, boy, I know how tough he was. I never saw anybody tougher, but just figured you and I can talk about that another time. So
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love
because
to.
I won't remember to tell you because
Okay, yeah, for sure. I'll follow up. Anything about Stanley would be awesome.
well, yeah, research it. But no, this is fascinating to me. And I'd love to keep in touch with you and hopefully have you on again. And I think it would be interesting if we could have David on again and get Justin, who's my student firefighter.
Yeah.
And that would be kind of nice to hear you two guys talk shop and kind of compare the stuff because sometimes we'll have martial artists on here that are a completely different style of martial arts, and we'll discuss similarities and differences between what we do and what they do. It's all education, man. It's just stuff that we can learn.
For sure. Yeah, no, it's been great getting to know you guys and chat a little bit, share some stories. But yeah, the campfires, you can share stories for hours. I've been at Tracker there till 1, 2 in the morning on some of the classes telling stories about fire. And you get going, you can just keep talking. The longer you do it, the more you get. And then as you guys ask questions, it jars my mind to think of something else. But great talking and great sharing. So hope whoever
thank you.
sees
Thank
this
you for making the
enjoys.
time. And I do, before we sign off, I just want to give you the opportunity, if there's some things you want the general public to know that maybe they're not aware of as far as when it comes to wildfire, prescribed burns and things that maybe we can help support you guys with, and maybe, and in a sense, help ourselves with the, obviously this is a pressing issue across not only the country, but the globe. So yeah.
Yep. And the US is starting to hit some of its peak season. So the West is going to get worse for the next couple months. So it's going to be more and more in the news. But like you mentioned earlier, it goes around the globe. You see seasons when Australia gets it, when South America gets it, when Europe gets it. Almost no continent is exempt from fire. It travels around the country and around the globe. And it is more of a pressing issue just with it getting more intense. And the big thing is for people to be smart about their fire, how they utilize fire, how their fuels around their property. This would be a great conversation for future is fire-wising your yard. We teach it in Florida, and that's having certain plants or certain defensible space around your property. I'm a big permaculturist as well. So I'm not a big believer in just having a mowed grass lawn. That's not the solution, even though that won't be easy to burn. But planting proper species that don't carry fire or make a humid or moist environment around your property, that can actually help defend it, but not having the volatile oils that make them catch. So that's a good topic. I encourage people to look into that defensible space.
No, you need to teach us that. We need to have you back on here because
absolutely,
again, this is something I never would have thought about.
Yep. Proper plant species around your house. Yeah. It's a huge thing, or having defensible space. And then if a fire is coming, working with the authorities, when they say to go, there's a reason. We run into it a lot that, 80, 90% will go, and there's a handful who won't. They're like, I've been here 30 years. It's never been bad. But the fires we're seeing are doing things they didn't used to do, stuff we've never seen them do, at least not in our lifetimes. And the conditions are getting crazier where it's a lot easier to lose human life. So being willing to get out of the way, the natives in Africa, the indigenous people around the world who've always experienced fire, you either got out of the way or you made black between it. If you can't get the black between you and the fire, you got to get out of the way and up and move. We've made our lives not nomadic like most tribes were. We've made them where we're so stationary. We build a house and we don't leave it. But sometimes there comes a time you got to grab your stuff and go. But if you have your house set up fire-wise beforehand with that defensible space, proper vegetation, and maybe even leaving tools and supplies for the firefighters to use, that makes it way easier to defend your property and save what you got.
Yeah, we have to dig into that. That's a subject that absolutely has to be, we have to discuss it.
Sure. Yeah, it needs to get out there. And I'm an interp guy. I like to talk to our community, but there's so few of us telling so many that a lot of people just don't know.
Hang
Well,
on,
hopefully we
Luke's-
got the word out to a few people today, you know,
Yeah.
and yeah, again, thank you for making the time. Obviously, you're a busy man doing a lot of good across the globe. So just really, really thank you again for making the time to be on our little show here. And
Hey, you're
hopefully,
welcome,
like I
Joe.
said, we can get the word out. And yeah, it was definitely cool hanging with you and at Tracker School. And I'm sure I will run into you again there.
Absolutely. Hopefully see you up there next summer.
Sure, for sure. Yeah, and good luck. I can see it's getting late there. You're in Florida.
Yeah, I know. I'm
time.
disappearing. I should have turned this light on before I started this. I'm a shadow scout back here, you know. But yeah, great talking to you guys.
Yeah, it's great talking to you too. I just noticed that unfortunately my laptop was unplugged. So
So Tony's
yeah.
probably going to be signing off. In a
Yeah,
few
so
seconds,
I'm
whether
gonna
he
be,
wants to or not.
well, that's why I'm unfortunately trying to cut it. We could talk longer, but yeah, it's not gonna make it. My screen just is almost jet black
Depressing.
now. Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome.
You
Well,
guys have
really
a great night.
show. Yeah, you too. Awesome. Thanks again, and we'll definitely be in touch.
Sounds good,
Yep.
Joe.
Hey,
See you
Thank
next
you.
time.
yeah, and I want everybody to thanks for watching the podcast. Yeah, I gotta sign off quickly before my computer dies. But thank you guys, and we'll see you next week because Joe's back in town.
All right.
Everybody cancel your vacations because Joe's here. All right, buddy. See you.
Bye, guys.
Okay, bye-bye. Yeah, I accidentally